Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Kelvin Roldan, Deputy Commissioner for System Transformation. Please note that this is being recorded and transmitted live via YouTube. So please make sure that you mute your microphones. Before I start, I want to just take a moment to thank all of the task force members for their work and for being part of this important work alongside with RIDE and community members across the state of Rhode Island. This is the last session of LEAP, our task force here. As a reminder, you might recall that we began this journey starting out with former U.S. Secretary of Education, John King. And today we are also joined by someone who the commissioner will introduce in a few minutes from the Department of Education. Today, given that it is our last meeting, we want to be able to once again focus on our recommendations. So we are going to have breakout rooms, and then before that, myself, co-chair Anna Riley, and Superintendent Mr. Ernicus will walk you through all of the work that has been done and the recommendations for your review prior to going into the breakout rooms in order to come back and then finalize our work together. As a reminder, we'll be sharing out a final draft with you prior to going to print so that we can have some final connection with you all before we do the work and continue and maintain you connected for the work. With that, I would like to introduce our Commissioner of Education, Angelica Infante Green.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming. This has been a wonderful 7 weeks. So many amazing faces of people that have dedicated their time, their ideas, and their energy to this work. I know that it's been an enormous amount of work, but anything you do from now on with RIDE, not from now on, Jennifer Wood, where are you? Anyone has an idea, we bring them in and we do the work. And I appreciate that because I think we have to work as a collective to be able to improve the outcomes for our kids, especially in this year that we have just experienced. So as we look at everything that we've done, the critical work, but you remember, as we've learned throughout these sessions, it isn't just about the academics. And we don't want to go back to pre-pandemic. We were not in a great place. And this is not about remediation, but acceleration, really finding that space. So now that we're taking a critical look with an eye towards what this commitment will look like for all of us and the LEAs, our CBOs, everyone that is in this space of education, because it's not just in the school system. But we know now what are the important things that need to be present. We know that dosage matters. We know that the professionals, that there needs to be content knowledge around it. We also know that the preference is that you have the same person teaching the student all the time, not just tutoring them at one session and then moving on. So we're reviewing the last round of edits and recommendations from the task force, that's you, and learn more about what we need to set our sights on in order to deliver the shift, concrete results in our education communities. Remember, this isn't just about after school, extended day, extending the summer. This is also about the core. Let's strengthen the core, because if the core is not strong, then everything else we do doesn't really have the great impact that we're hoping for. So I'm glad that we're here and we have the full commitment of every group represented in this task force. We here at RIDE really believe in having every voice represented. It is the only way that we're going to actually make change, is that all constituency groups can be part and have a voice in the conversation. So these 7 weeks have been challenging. We couldn't have gotten to this place without you. But I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you. But I also have to thank, there's some people that make the magic happen behind the scenes that you have not seen because they're very humble. And that is Christopher Redden and Wilda Reynoso, who put everything together, getting us ready for these sessions. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. But I appreciate each and every one of you that have done this work and will continue to work with us. I know that a lot of you, this is where my staff hates me. A lot of you have talked about how we're going to continue doing this work as we move on, right? Are there going to be subgroups? Are there going to be anything that we can do to further the agenda for social, emotional, and academic? We're here and we're going to do it with you. Remember, this is about us as a community working together. Now I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing to you someone that I have a lot of respect for, someone that I've known for a very long time, who in New York used to push me very hard. But I'd like to thank, and I'm very excited to have Acting Assistant Secretary Ian Rosenblum from the U.S. Department of Education with us here today. Most recently, in my home state of New York, my old home state, excuse me, he was the executive director of Ed Trust New York, a statewide policy and advocacy organization committed to educational equity. He also used to work for the governor, which was probably one of his toughest jobs. But we're so grateful to have him here today to listen to our recommendations so that hopefully that we can serve as a catalyst or a way to inform the Department of Education and also help other states that are in a different place than we are. So I want to thank you, Secretary. I'd like to hand it over to you. I'm so excited to be able to say that with your name, Ian.
Thank you so much, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today on behalf of Secretary Cardona and the U.S. Department of Education. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of this task force's final recommendations on supporting Rhode Island students. As you know, and I know is rooted in the work that you're doing, the pandemic has exacerbated the pre-existing educational inequities across the country. And that underscores right now the need to ensure that we are addressing the social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs of all students, and especially those who are most impacted by the pandemic. I've been learning from Commissioner Infante Green's leadership for years, and I'm eager to hear more today from the Commissioner and from the task force. There's obviously a lot that we can learn from what Rhode Island is doing. Over the last year, we've been following Rhode Island's work, protecting the health and safety of students and educators while addressing educational inequities. That includes, of course, addressing the technology needs of students during remote learning, implementing a statewide summer learning program, and making a push for the safe return to in-person learning. I want to recognize the extraordinary efforts by educators, by families, and by students in communities across Rhode Island during these difficult times that has made this work possible. And at the U.S. Department of Education, we're proud to be a partner with states as we continue to do this work together. And most recently, the president signed into law the American Rescue Plan, which will provide resources to support states and school districts in undergoing these efforts with urgency to support students and educators. In Rhode Island, that will mean more than $415 million in resources through the American Rescue Plan's Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. And we're excited to be able to talk a lot more about that soon. And for the moment, I'm just glad to be part of this conversation and looking forward to hearing more of this group's recommendations. So thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Assistant Secretary. We are very grateful that you were able to join us today, and we're super excited to share our work with you. Before we move into today's conversations, as we usually do, we want to take a moment to review the ways that you can communicate with us, the LEAP Task Force. For those of you following along, please include the hashtag LEAPRI and share your experiences. Share RIDE's posts on social media, reach out to us via our email at leaptaskforce@ride.ri.gov. Again, that's leaptaskforce@ride.ri.gov. I think I have that memorized by now. Please continue to engage as we release the recommendations and move towards putting our work into action in the field over the coming months and years. I would at this time like to give folks another chance to look at the theory of action, to review this theory of action, just to have it in the back of your mind as we re-engage in the discussions today. And as you're looking that over, I will remind you that at the end of this process, we are scheduled to deliver a report with some very high-level recommendations to help guide Rhode Island's path to learning acceleration. I'd also like to take a moment to remind us all of the LEAP Task Force work. First, we developed an understanding of the systemic enabling conditions. Second, we have established task force absolute priorities. We then worked on developing recommendations and a framework for our work. And finally, we will work to inform the fiscal guidance for the field, the RIDE fiscal guidance for the field. Deputy Commissioner Riley, could you kick us off on a final review of the initial recommendations?
Thank you, Jim. We have heard loud and clear that certain enabling conditions must be met at the systems level. These include addressing systemic racial inequities in our educational system, centering the voices of students and families, prioritizing partnership and intentional collaboration across our entire education ecosystem, and last, codifying a sense of collective action and shared accountability. As Jim mentioned, we have 5 LEAP absolute priorities. We know that to help our students who need it the most, we must engage and energize students, families, educators, and communities. We must ensure that all students have varied access to high quality and personalized support from adults. Universally screen all students and align resources to those needs. Improve and support student transitions across all grades and every system. Close the digital divide for all of our students. In support of priority 1, we need to engage students and families and energize educators and communities. This includes launching a whole of state campaign and a toolkit to help talk about this work and bring students back to school. We need to focus intentionally on finding, reaching, and engaging our opportunity youth. We are going to work to highlight summer programming so everyone knows what opportunities are available to them. We need to elevate the power of coming together to support social emotional wellness. And finally, we need to use our summer programming as a vehicle to elevate youth voice and to re-engage our families for the long term. Priority 2, we must ensure that all students have varied access to high quality and personalized support from adults through extended learning, partnerships in before and after school, and summer learning opportunities. This summer, every child should have access to at least one high quality extended learning opportunity. It's going to be particularly important for every urban student, multilingual learner, and our differently abled students with IEPs to be enrolled and engaged in a summer learning opportunity that meets their needs. We need to prioritize the values of flexibility, choice, access, and autonomy. We must forge intentional partnerships between LEAs and CBOs. Priority 3, we must universally screen all of our students and align resources to that need. We will screen students both academically and social emotionally. We will plan and allocate resources with a clear and focused priority for those supports. We will root all of our solutions in high quality instructional materials and professional learning for our educators. Across this work and through every action we take, we must be culturally responsive and anti-racist. And we know it's not just in our work with students. We have to continue to focus on building and sustaining adult capacity to work in teams. Jim, I'll let you continue with the next set of priorities. Jim, you're muted. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. We know that our goal is to improve and support student transitions across all grades and systems. And to do that, it means that we must have stronger partnerships to support that work. We must include targeted family engagement and resources for outreach and support to our communities. And it requires us to articulate clearer pathways to both college, career, and the workforce that are responsive to the needs of our children. As our next priority, we must close the digital divide. To do this, we need to prioritize achieving equity across the state by resolving any remaining barriers to access technology devices and service. We must ensure that our students, our families, and our communities have access to digital literacy programming and broadband that they need. As part of our continuous improvement, we must identify areas where we can and should do better, particularly for delivering instruction during difficult circumstances. The next recommendations define the role of RIDE as the state education agency. In support of our LEAP absolute priority statements, RIDE should seize this opportunity to tackle structural educational inequities across the state through anti-racist and anti-bias policies and practices. We must elevate LEAP absolute priorities to support these recommendations with the power of policy and regulation. We are working to create alignment across pre-existing systems, partnerships, and initiatives, and ask that RIDE do the same in collaboration. RIDE will work to launch their summer 21 work and begin planning programming to lead a statewide summer program in 2022. RIDE will also continue to shift to an agency of support and not just compliance through proactive communications and public transparency. The next recommendations define the role of the local education agencies. Again, in support of the LEAP absolute priority statements, LEAs should tailor out time and energy so that we can provide targeted, progressive supports to the students most in need. We need to reimagine what mastery looks like and redefine seat time. We will focus on bundles of high priority standards using high quality instructional materials, including additional learning opportunities for our students. We need to leverage community partners to provide enrichment, extended learning opportunities, and summer learning programs. And we should work to remove barriers to collaboration. Lastly, we must reconfigure our human capital to support the reorientation of LEAs toward urgent student support, particularly at this time. The last set of recommendations are for our community-based organizations, our partners. In support of our absolute priority statements, CBOs should provide programming that promotes academic growth and addresses the social emotional well-being of our students. It must meet student demand, and it must ensure that students attend and remain engaged in these programs. We should all leverage our existing relationships with students and their families to engage students in extended or enrichment learning opportunities all year long. Our CBOs must partner with municipalities, parent organizations, and school systems for program design and recruitment for true collaboration. They should also create intentional engagement with and alignment to the LEAs. And lastly, we all must engage in professional learning to better be able to serve multilingual learners and differently abled students. Dr. Roldan, can you help us walk through the next steps for the task force?
Thank you, Jim. So we wanted to make sure that as a commitments from right to execute and operationalize this work, that you understood what our work looked like for the next 30 to 60 days or so. Some of it is more longer term, some of it is more immediate, as you can see here. And by no means are they ranking any order of importance, but rather wanted to just share what are the immediate next steps that we are going to take as an agency. As you can see here, as the first one is we are going to share this work. The commissioner already made a presentation to the council last month or this month to update them on this, and we're going to be presenting as a follow-up the final set of recommendations to the council. The report itself, you can expect that it will be released in mid-April. Prior to that, you will receive a draft copy of it, but we expect that mid-April is our target for publication. But immediately, and as you know, we have been working concurrently with drafting the recommendations, but also doing the work. And one of those elements is really the ESSER2 application. We have already released figures to the districts, but now we are working to align the LEAP recommendations into the application so that districts can have access to those resources aligned to the LEAP recommendations that are here. It's also important to know that because all of the research, the work, the data that we have collected is going to make it a lot easier for districts to put their applications together, because they're not going to have to go outside of the process to do that, which will make the process smoother and the application and review process for staff critically aligned, which is a big plus, I think, for the field. Thereafter, we at RIDE are going to be working internally to do a couple of things. Number one is to connect and align this work to our own strategic operating plan to make sure that there is alignment, so that then we can connect that to a series of metrics and give us a little time to work with the field as well to align and collect some data to create some baselines and then release those metrics publicly so that it is well understood what it is that we are doing connected to this work. So we're also going to work to align the recommendations to our efforts around school improvement and district improvement, particularly as it connects to the anti-racist policy agenda, which is critical. You know, nationally, there has not been really such an effort, although certainly from an equity perspective, there are frameworks. When it comes to actually articulating a process for improvement, the state of Rhode Island will be at the forefront of what that looks like and what it will mean on the ground floor for school improvement and district improvement efforts. Additionally, Anna and her team will be working collectively to distribute and make available the standards and make sure that CBOs have access to that information as well, so that there is greater alignment between what the LEAs are doing in partnership with our CBOs. Our team has already begun to think about and engage in terms of what it will look like to have a statewide communications effort and providing districts, LEAs, and others with the necessary toolkits in a differentiated manner to make sure that we are reaching out to our targeted and important populations across the state. We will continue, and as you know, we have had quite an effort around social emotional learning. So we will continue to do that, and we will continue to expand on what is available to us and making more opportunities available for LEAs and educators across the state. We have already released our summer RFP. Again, planning the work and doing the work at the same time, not waiting for things to get completed, but rather reflecting on the work that this team has done. And that if you have already seen the RFP, you will notice that many of the recommendations are reflected in that RFP and are already in the field. And lastly, we have been working on the development of a racial equity tool within the agency to guide our work as a whole within the agency. And so we are going to not only do that internally, but our intent is to be able to release that publicly as well with a target date of June 2021. With that, I'll hand it over to the co-chairs.
Thank you, Kelvin. So before we break out into our smaller groups to reflect on all this information, I wanted to again remind us of our norms. Please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. Please keep your questions related to our topics. Comment on initiatives, not individuals. Again, be present, listen actively, honor equity of voice, trust the process, and please always type in the chat if you have any difficulties. Okay, as we move to our breakout rooms, please feel free to elevate questions. The note taker in your breakout room will record the inquiries in the hopes that we can return to you with answers either before or during our time together. Please make sure your breakout room has identified a speaker, because remember, we will be moving from breakout room to breakout room again this week. So today our facilitators will be the ones who move from room to room, and we want you to think of these as safe spaces, but please step away if you need to. And each facilitator will stay with your group for 1/2 hour. We will reconvene here in the general room at 10:20 to share out. Okay, Vic, you can take us away.
I think everyone is back. I want to thank you all for the conversations. I know in my group, we got fired up for a period of time, pretty intense conversations. It was great to be a part of. At this point in time, we are going to ask the different groups to have their spokesperson briefly share out some of the main points and themes that came up throughout the conversation. So starting with group number one, that's the group that started with Lisa. I think that is who is going to speak on for that group.
I was going to say, I don't know who it was. I joined late.
We took care of it. We took care of it after the fact.
I think it was me.
Alex, it is Alex. Yes.
It is me.
Alex.
All right. Okay, good. Man, I could have said quiet. Anyhow, so our group, we did have a delightful discussion on every topic possible. So a couple things. How do we work with schools, right, to think about contracts? So one of the things that came up was, sorry, folks, I'm just looking at my notes and I'm getting a lot of different messages from work as well. It's very fun. So thinking about what this work looks like, especially in Rhode Island, right, with sometimes CBOs and folks in general, you don't want to travel to Cranston because they live in Providence, want to bring an overnight bag. So how do we bring CBOs and folks together, right, to do this work? So how do small school districts learn about CBOs and we provide services and allow CBOs to kind of ramp up and employ more individuals? In addition, thinking about performance-based contracts to some extent, it leaves some folks out, right? It makes the assumption that CBOs have the money in reserve to put the money up front. So we're thinking about contracts. It's important to ensure that all CBOs, small CBOs, special CBOs run by people, BIPOC individuals, have an opportunity to provide services. In addition, some of the topics discussed was, at the end of the day, we saw a lot of things that the system is doing for kids and to kids. But once again, the conversation came back about what internal work are we doing as adults, right? Young people learn from adults. So you can buy the best curricula, you can buy the best, but if adults don't have the best practice or the adults don't model the best behavior, kids can still not learn. How do we remove barriers from learning? You know, we know that this was brought in our group that the pandemic did show some things. However, some of the things that were not working before the pandemic. So how we truly have those tough conversations, both school districts, CBOs, to remove those barriers that are preventing young people from actually being engaged in learning. Another great topic was this idea how to integrate academics and SEL, right? And to some extent, it's like it's not one or another. Both of them need to be part of the conversation. But even before the pandemic, most school districts were not doing this well. So how do we do this well? A couple comments were made that a lot of CBOs, especially the after school field, have done this already. They've been thinking about equity work. They've been thinking about how to engage young people. So how do we bring that back? And one of the things that came up was, how do we sustain this, right? What does the timeline look like? What can we do? And really being clear, during the summer, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, and the fall is gonna lead to this, and 2 years down the line, it's gonna lead to this. So what are those benchmarks, right, that we should be following to ensure that this is not, let's do everything at once. We know that's not the case. And how do you sustain this? And really highlighting this is not the money that's coming down the pike, is to put an event and put a flyer and be done with it and say, we're done. This is gonna be ongoing work. That's going to take districts longer. Some districts are in different places, and acknowledging that will be important. And one thing I just want to highlight that folks brought up was data sharing. What does that look like to build capacity for each other? Not only small districts who may have somebody who's doing a data department, and now they may have 5 CBOs who want to partner with them. They don't have the capacity to share data. So what's RIDE's role in general to ensure that folks have templates, TA, and just ongoing support to be able to do this work right. And feel free to say something else if I missed something.
You got it all, Alex. Okay, Spencer, who from your initial group will be sharing out?
Paige.
Paige.
All right, so we had really great discussions. I'm gonna just highlight some of the points that I think really need to be raised up and to give RIDE some additional thoughts to think of as you enter into like this final stage of planning. First, I spent a lot of time talking about the summer and CBO's work, and really important came up around looking at equity work, not just for students, but also equity work about the types of summer programs that are provided, especially those programs that are led by BIPOC leaders, and to really look at and think about the process and the impact of different opportunities that are being offered on those smaller organizations. So an example was given around the unintentional competition that SAIL created because some students were paid through SAIL, which they could not compete with some of the smaller nonprofits who are working really hard just trying to find small pockets of money to have their really important programs open and offered. So really thinking about how does the procurement process, how does the RFP process, the reimbursement process, like how does all of that impact some of our community-based organizations that provide great service. We talked about access to data as well being a part of that thought process. And there was a suggestion offered around RIDE creating a universal consent form for data that can be helpful and used by all partners with LEA, so that really crucial and important data is shared earlier with our out-of-school time providers. We also talked about incentivizing long-term relationships between LEAs and providers. And let's see, we also had some data around and questions around the recommendation that all students or all kids should have access to a summer enrichment program, but it will cost money. It's estimated that would be about $70 million. There's still several kids on a waiting list right now for our out-of-school time program. So what does that mean? Is it realistic to think that all students will be able to get an after-school program? What kind of financial supports will be given, especially for low-income students, students of color, students with disabilities, and multilingual learners? How can we make sure they get prioritized in those offerings? We also talked about RIDE's identity crisis is what we talked about it as our group. The idea of, RIDE providing support, but there's also some non-negotiables. And it was stated in our group that educators, or many educators, are fine to have some non-negotiables as long as there is support given to them to do so. And then we also talked a lot about the anti-racist and equity work that is weaved throughout the recommendations. There was a suggestion that every LEA should do an audit on their anti-racist, their policies, instructions, and materials in order to get this right and to start with some basic information and figure out where they need to improve their anti-racist policies and practices. There was also a suggestion that there should be a civil rights officer in all or most districts. So there is a formal process for how discrimination cases or complaints can be heard. And of course, raising up youth voice throughout all of this work. This is all higher level adults having conversations here, but how are we bringing young people into this planning process? So I think that's it, group.
Thank you, Paige. Christine, from your initial group will be sharing?
Tammy. Thank you, Tammy.
All right, thank you.
Of course. So, yep, our group had some very engaging conversation as well. I will say that we talked a lot about the same topics that have already come up, and we support all of those topics. In addition to those, I will just highlight some that haven't been said before. One that came up very early on was the need for additional guidance from RIDE around a variety of things, specifically how funding is going to be utilized, or how LEAs or SEAs and CBOs can apply for funding. There was an ask for more guidelines around that. There was also an ask for RIDE to also provide leadership by providing a variety of sort of a menu of options, not asking for mandates on what should be done, but some ideas around what can be done. How can the funding be used? How can the different providers focus on different initiatives? Leadership from RIDE to help connect and liaison between LEAs and CBOs. This idea that with all of that, some flexibility is needed, but yet there is TA necessary for these different types of organizations to learn how to effectively work together. There's also something else that came up is how do we shift the summer program identity or mentality around, again, summer work being a punishment, sort of that deficit approach. You have to do summer because you didn't do well, because your grades were low, et cetera. How do we shift that mindset to an invitation to engage, to learn, an opportunity for everyone to be engaged during the summer? There was some discussion around the fiscal plan. What is the fiscal plan? I know that has already come up, but more clarity around around this plan. Who is going to be taking point or lead on what? So there was an ask for clarity around that. There was an ask for more specific guidelines on expectations. I think that came up already as well. And that also there was an ask for RIDE to take a leadership approach and model some of the ideas. So maybe provide information about how exactly RIDE is maybe modeling some of this work already. A lot of conversation again around the anti-racist work. That it would be helpful to understand how the system as a whole is already taking lead on doing some of this work themselves. There was also a lot of conversation again around this anti-racist work and how challenging and daunting the work can be, and how do we use models in place that are already doing this work well? How do we provide more PD for teachers on how to even approach this work and learn to engage staff and students in this work as well? Also, there was a concern around prioritization of traditionally marginalized populations and making sure that we don't lose the focus on the needs of that community when we're trying to prioritize the needs of more and more communities as well. And lastly, there was conversation around the digital divide. How do we make sure that communities have access to broadband? And how do we negotiate the tension between activities needing to be both highly engaging or academic? We said they don't. It's both and. They should be both things. We don't need to separate or tease those out. And then lastly, how do we utilize the summer as an opportunity to help all, especially students, but all staff and teachers and communities alike, to learn how to re-engage in person again after what this last year has been traumatizing and socially isolating for a lot of our communities? How do we help everyone learn how to re-engage in person?
Thank you, Tammy. I think clearly we have a lot to continue to think about, and we have a lot of responsibility and I think opportunity that lies immediately ahead for all of us. So at this time, I would like to reintroduce the Commissioner Aponte Green, who is going to close out today's meeting, which is the last meeting of our task force. Commissioner?
Thank you all. I have to once again thank you for your time, but we heard very critically a couple of things. You know, we've been trying to close the gap that has existed, the achievement gap. And the reason that we have not been able to do that is for a couple of reasons. We have not included race in our work. It's not just about reading and writing. It is about the issues that plague our society, which has to do with race, economics, but also not prioritizing the communities that need it most. So we heard the conversations today about providing professional development for the educators, including the students in the conversations, including the CBOs as partners in the work, not just during summer or after school, but throughout our journey. Parents, students, engaging them to be part of the solution. So as we move forward, it cannot just be the academics and the social emotion. There has to be race. There's a sense of how we look at the work that is going to be really important as we move forward. Strengthening what we are doing well and moving towards the things that we need to improve as one community. We have proven that in Rhode Island. We are national leaders in the work that we're doing currently, and we intend to stay there, right? Yes, I know we will. But I have to say that I'm very proud of the work that everybody has come here to do. Everybody's come with a positive attitude, with a willingness to hear one another and to work collaboratively and to be critical friends to make sure that we get to the next level. And I heard somebody say the identity crisis. No, there's no identity crisis. We know that RIDE, we have to do the compliance, but we want to support you in meeting the compliance. So I think we're in a good place as a state. But I want to thank you all. We will have the final report the first week of April, and we will put in those non-negotiables. Your voices will be throughout the report. You're going to receive a draft so you can give us back any feedback that you have. But we're going to give you very short deadlines on that. So I am going to close out today by thanking each and every one of you, for thanking my staff, for thanking Anna, Kelvin, Jim, who have taken on, this has been a heavy lift, but it is really important that we start thinking differently, that we include all our partners as we do the work. This is the only way that we're going to continue to lead and really push our kids forward. And I want to remind us, kids of color, kids of differently able, kids that are multilingual learners, kids that are in poverty have been in a crisis. They have been in a crisis prior to COVID. This has just exacerbated it, but this is how we need to look at it. So when Paige just said that we have to look at prioritizing, that's what we need to do in all our work as we move forward. Not retrofitting like we've done in the past, but really in this area. I want to thank you for your thoughtful discussions, your participation, your willingness to push, above all, for having the hope that is for children in all our communities. I want to thank you all.